Byarrde, ya-plcqlch, and welcome to another pointless video. Yay! So once again, I was bored and I asked a friend, the exact same friend as from my last video, to give me something else to translate, but this time into a different language. And so of the two that could use a little more fleshing out, somehow once again she probably chose the most difficult. This time I'll be translating the opening narration to an anime called One Piece, and this time the language will also be different. It will be Nixish. And so my idea going into creating this language was that they would probably use a lot of like pop clicky kind of consonants and lots of consonants, which makes it very different from English. I'm trying to improve quality all around, which hopefully you can tell by the fact that I am actually in focus and not currently blending into the wall anymore. So instead of just jumping right in, I'm gonna start with a little more background on the language first, and then we can get into the translation. We'll start off with the same way that I start making any language, which is the sounds, consonants and vowels the language is going to use, the phonology. Since there's more varieties of consonants than there are vowels, usually I start with the consonants. Especially when you're working with a story where other people that are talking might not be human, so they might have different biology and they might live in a different environment, which is the case with these guys because they're basically talking fish, they live in the ocean, so they're gonna want to communicate in a slightly different way. So we start with consonants. A lot of these consonants are gonna be familiar to an English speaker. Up at the top we have nasal sounds like n, and all of those sounds exist in English. The next level down though, we get into the plosives, and there's something a little strange. You can see in this list of plosives that all of the sounds, b, d, g, they're all on the right side of a line, which means that they are voiced counterparts to the other plosives. So to single out one of the sounds, the voiced plosive d, as in dog, is the counterpoint to the unvoiced plosive t, as in tor. But you'll notice that the unvoiced counterparts, they're not next to them, and that's because all of the unvoiced plosives are pronounced as ejectives. So you take the basic sound p, as in English pie, but instead of letting out any air with it, like p, you don't. You build up pressure and then you just kind of eject it, which is the sound you make when beatboxing. That last one is going to be really difficult. Obviously this is a lot more, I guess the word is sonorant. It's louder, it pops, which allows it to carry better underwater. Then there's w and y, those are the semi-vowels. Then there are technically the same two liquids that we have in English. There's R and L, but R is almost exclusively pronounced as a trill, r. And at the bottom of this list, you'll see the affricates. English has two affricates as far as I'm aware, ch and j. An affricate is literally just a plosive placed in front of a sibilant, like s, sh, z, or zh. Nixish has ts, which is just t and s. Ts. But the strangest sounds in Nixish are these non-pulmonic consonants. We already went over p, t, k, but there's also these two clicks. Click sounds are really rare in human languages, but they do exist. Nixish has a dental click, which is when you put the tip of your mouth behind your teeth and you suck in air really quickly. And it also has the alveolar click, which is just behind what is sometimes called the pizza ridge, because it's where you burn your mouth when you eat pizza. So you put your tongue just on or behind that, and you get the alveolar click. So it has, and I'm gonna try to go over vowels a little more quickly. In linguistics, there are two kinds of vowel sounds. First is what's called monophthongs, which are just individual sounds. And there are 4 monophthongs in Nixish: I, E, A, and O. I is the sound E, but with rounded lips, I. There are also 4 diphthongs. Diphthongs are vowel sounds where 2 vowels blend into each other. The first is E and I, so it's E. Then there's I, O, and IE. And that's the complete phonology. So the next stage is to go on to the forms of words and if and how they modify. And usually in this process, I begin with the nouns. So like many languages on Earth, Nixish has feminine and masculine nouns. And just like in human languages with feminine and masculine gender, grammatical gender, it doesn't really have anything to do with how the object is perceived, except when it's genuinely the word for female, male, boy, girl, etc. So feminine. Nouns in Nixish also decline or inflect for grammatical number. Nixish has 2 grammatical numbers, which is the same as English, singular and plural. Nixish nouns also decline for indefinite versus definite. So instead of putting the word a or the word the in front of a noun, the noun actually changes in its spelling and pronunciation to become definite. And finally, Nixish nouns have 2 different cases. The first is the ordinary nominative. If you haven't seen my previous video, I highly recommend that you go and check that out, because I do a little bit more in-depth analysis of declension and cases. But as a summary, some languages alter the spelling and pronunciation of nouns depending on their function in the sentence. The only other case in Nixish is kind of a strange one. It's terminative, and that means as far as a noun. If you're talking about the shore and you use it in its nominative case, you would just be saying a shore or the shore. If you use the noun in its terminative case, you would be saying as far as a shore or as far as the shore. So that's nouns, which are fairly simple in Nixish. So I hate to disappoint you, but now we move on to verbs. Oh no. Nixish verbs are kind of complicated, but they're not quite as complicated as Sylvan verbs. The only reason this chart is so large is because the conjugation or the changing of the verb, the way it changes depends on its ending. So every verb will really just get one of these charts. So for instance, if a Nixish verb ends in the sound or it will have this chart, which means that the infinitive to verb ends in er, and the rest of it you can see here. Nixish verbs have 3 moods. There's the indicative, which is just how it is, it's what's happening or what happened or what will happen. There's the hortative, which means it's like encouragement. It's kind of like a command, but it's more gentle.
No, on second thoughts, let's not go to Camelot. It is a silly place.
And then there's the interrogative. So a verb will change if it's part of a question. Did you verb? Nixish verbs also change depending on grammatical number. There are singular verbs, which are done by one thing, and there are plural verbs, which are done by multiple things. And finally, it has 2 tenses, past and present. Future tense, just like in English, is expressed with future modifiers. So in English we would say I eat or I ate, but if we're talking about the future, we would say I will eat or I'm going to eat. Lastly, there are adjectives and adverbs. Adjectives are very simple. They can be both feminine or masculine, and they also change depending on whether the noun is nominative or terminative. If the adjective is being described as definite, you would put the particle wa in front of it. So for instance, if you were saying something is the vibrant one, the colorful one, you would use the adjective wa, but you would put the definite article wa in front of it. Wa. I'm having so much fun with Nixish consonants. Why did I do this to myself? Adverbs are even more simple. You take the adverb and then you put the end on it, which corresponds to the same conjugation table of the verb. So in the conjugation table where the infinitive ends in er, you would use the adverb ending in gri. Okay, now we have our sounds and we have our words. What's left is to decide how they fit together. That's kind of what I do last, and that all falls under syntax. Nixish is an OSV language. The English sentence, he eats apples, for instance, becomes apples he eats. We went over nouns, and you may or may not have noticed that there's no genitive case. This is probably a good point to mention that in my last video, when I explained cases, I mentioned that genitive means that it belongs to something. Other way around. Genitive means that something belongs to it. So Nixish has no genitive case. Instead, it does something almost identical to English, which we also talked about in the Sylvan video, where English will sometimes use a noun like an adjective. If you're going to a show about cars, it's a car show. It's not a cars show or show of cars, it's a car show. Nixish does basically the same thing, except you always have to put a hyphen in between the two words. Adjectives always come after their nouns, and the last part of what I've written down about Nixish syntax that I'll mention is just that the fun part is that they have massive consonant clusters. English has some consonant clusters, but usually they're limited to 2, sometimes 3 consonants. Nixish doesn't really care how many consonants you want to throw in there. They're just go for it, you know, they love consonants. There are so many words in Nixish that are spelled entirely with consonants that have no vowels. And sometimes this is done using a glide or a semivowel. Those 4 sounds are ones that frequently can take the place of a vowel in a syllable. Okay, that's a lot of information. Now we have the grammar, the phonology, the sentence structure, that's also grammar. We have all that information done. We can focus on the translation.
Do you know what time it is? It's mint break time.
The whole narration opens with 3 different nouns. The first one is Byarrde, the second one is Ean-oa, and the third one is Ta'ar. These translate as wealth, fame, and technically the best translation of Ta'ar is control, but it also represents authority, which can be translated as power, and so it translates power in this narration. These, just like most nouns in this narration and most nouns in ordinary speech in Nixish, are in the nominative case. I mentioned earlier that Nixish is an OSV language, so when we actually get into these clauses and not just single word phrases, the word order starts to look a little peculiar. So this English sentence begins with The man who had everything in this world. The Nixish translation of that first phrase is Wriowansmon Wribeng wa Uitam. The opening phrase is Wriowansmon, everything in the world. These two nouns here, Wrio and Smon, have two features that I actually didn't go over. The word for everything, Wrio, ends in this letter here. This I didn't even mention in the part about consonants. This is a glottal stop. This consonant doesn't have real grammatical meaning in English, and it's very hard for English speakers to hear because it's different from just about every other consonant that we speak. You can hear the difference if I don't pronounce it, Wrio versus Wrio. So in English, this does appear sometimes when you say uh-oh. There's a glottal stop between and o, uh-oh. It's called a glottal stop because the glottis at the back of your throat closes quickly and then opens again. Uh-oh. It stops the air and then lets it out again. This has also gained notoriety in memes about varieties of British English which use the pronunciations of bo'o or be'a. There's a glottal stop where the T is. In linguistics, we call this an allophone. Essentially, that just means if a British or American English speaker look at the letter T and you ask them to pronounce it, they will almost invariably tell you that it's pronounced ta, even though in English we pronounce this word butter, and some people in England will pronounce it ba. In America, we're using a d sound, and in England, they're using an sound. It's not the sound that we would tell you that T makes, but it's the sound that the T's are making in this word. The glottal stop in Nixish isn't an allophone, it's its own consonant. So if there were a word Wrio, that could conceivably have a completely different meaning to Wrio. The word for the world is Smon, and that has a vowel quality that I didn't cover. In Nixish, there are the 4 vowels, and there are the 4 diphthong vowels, but all of these can either have or not have creak. You put creak in it, so it's not o, it's o, and that becomes a different vowel. It's not smon, it's smon. It's just another quality I gave their vowels so that they can differentiate between more different kinds of words. One is a preposition, it just means in. Wrio wan smon is everything in the world. The man is wribeng, again there's the glottal stop there, wribeng. Wa is a conjunction, which means that or which, and again the verb is uitam, beginning with a glottal stop this time, and it means had. So we have these 2 separate clauses here, everything in the world, the man that had. And this is because the object isn't just everything, it's everything in the world. It's a phrasal noun. The entire noun is Wrio wan smon. The noun to which this phrase is referring to is also a phrasal noun. Gold Roger, the Pirate King. The name was an interesting challenge that I wasn't sure how to tackle because I looked up the character, and the reason his nickname is Gold Roger is because his first name is Gol and his middle initial is D. So Gold D Roger. His nickname is Gold Roger. But clearly based on the story, it doesn't have nothing to do with the fact that he's a very rich person. So I decided to approach this as a nickname based on the fact that he's rich, that he has a lot of gold. So I had to ask my friend which would be more appropriate, Roger of Gold or Roger the Gold. In the first case, of gold, gold is being treated as another noun, whereas Roger the Gold treats gold as the adjective version of the word. And so that would change how I translate it, because remember, adjectives in Nixish come after the noun, but if it's a noun that's being treated as an adjective, like in English, it comes before the noun that it's describing with a hyphen in between. So my friend said that probably it's more accurate to say Roger of gold, which led me to the translation an radier. An radier. Nixish also has no really good equivalent for the j sound, so I just had to put d with the glide y on the end, and it becomes radier or radier. The word gold is very difficult to pronounce because it's an ejective followed by a click, followed by an radier. And immediately following this is another case of a genitive construct. So pirate in Pirate King is being used like an adjective. So the word for pirate, which is also very fun to pronounce, that is and, comes before and is hyphenated to the word sprau, sprau, sprau. God, why did I do this to myself? Sprau. So ordinarily, if we were saying the king, the word king here would be changed, but because this is a genitive construct, in this instance, I'm not sure if I'll stick with it, but I decided that if it's a genitive construct, then the definite article for adjectives would be used instead of definite inflection. We have the definite article wa. So taken all together, this noun phrase is an radier and sprau. So Gold Roger the Pirate King is the man who has everything in the world. The next English sentence is the great treasure he left behind, One Piece, has opened the curtain on a grand era. So the object, it's the curtain to a great era. Okay? So that begins with the definite noun, the curtain, matsk'eng, which translates basically to a cover or a hide. Then we have the preposition rm, which is to. And then there's another interesting thing about Nixish, which I didn't cover, which is that the indefinite article, r, comes after the noun. A great era is it'agzam r. You'll see this suffix tsam showing up a lot because this narration uses the word great to describe a lot of things. So the phrasal noun, which is the object of this sentence, is matsk'eng rum it'agzam r. We have the great fortune he left. That's the subject. So the great fortune is one word because we have the word k'ipartma, which is also inflected because it's the definite, so it becomes k'ipartma'na. It's also described as the great fortune, so again we have the suffix tsam, k'ipartma'na tsam. Then we have the pronoun for he, which is on, and the verb in the past tense, k'retk'n, which means left, or abandoned, or forsook. The sentence takes a pause to identify One Piece, which in Nixish will be used as a definite noun instead of just one piece. There's a prefix, which means the one, which is essentially what's going on with the noun One Piece. So the full word with ts on the front is tzwurktrna. So that is the subject, and the verb that it is doing is the past tense opened, which is just dmog, which is very easy compared to all of the other words in this sentence. So the curtain to a great era, the great fortune he left, the One Piece, opened. I'm not going to read that whole thing in Nixish again. The next English sentence is describing the grand era that it mentioned in the previous sentence. It is a time when eager pirates set sail, battle, and become great. Thankfully, this is not an adjective describing a noun in the same way that we would use the suffix tsam. The noun for time is it'ag, and again that's followed by the indefinite article it'agr. Nixish doesn't have neuter pronouns, it only has masculine and feminine. The word for time is considered feminine, so it uses the pronoun she. Urinra. The verb here is ri, which means is. We have the conjunction wa again, which is just which. We have the plural form of the word for pirates, and. Remember, there's the glottal stop there between the D and the L, so it's not dlur, it's dlur. The adjective yaur, which is eager, and then there are the three verbs. Set out is ar, vor is rto. The conjunction and is at, become great. I translate it instead as flourish or succeed, which is leanhod, which is the plural present tense of a verb which primarily means to brighten or to become glowing. Subsequently, this era is again described as the great era of pirates. And so we have the definite article w in front of another genitive construct. The next English sentence would be, words he spoke drove countless men out to sea. So the subject would be the words he spoke, or words he spoke. The object would be men which are countless, and the verb being drove to sea. Object comes first, countless men becomes rib'an radan. The subject is the words he spoke. Words is metler, which is a very fun word to pronounce. On, again, is the pronoun for he. The past tense verb is ok awedra. Ok awedra. I'm spitting everywhere. Words he spoke becomes metler on ok awedra. The verb, past tense, drove, is klde, and it drove them to water. So this is the first instance we see of the terminative case, which means as far as water. The word for water, ocean or sea, is mawat, and the terminative singular of that is mawat. The next sentence is, and so men set sights on the Grand Line in pursuit of their dreams. The Grand Line in this story being a strip of ocean that goes around the planet, or basically around the equator. Instead of and so, we just have le, which means so, and can be used in the instance of and so. The object of this first phrase will be eyes, the subject is men, and the verb is fasten. Men fasten eyes. We have another instance of a terminative case of a noun. We take the word line, we make it definite, we make it terminative to the line, and then we add the suffix zam, great. So to the great line is igenwarzam. And the reason they're doing this is to chase their dreams. If the noun which possesses another noun is established earlier in a separate clause, in Nixish you can just turn the noun that is being owned into a definite. You don't have to make it into a genitive construct. To chase their dreams becomes the dreams to chase. Monta ayorto. Le bekler rib an dog atl genwartam monta ayordo. We have the preposition wan again, and this begins the sentence which in the English is, the world has truly entered a great pirate era. The Nixish translation becomes, in great pirate era, the world is certainly. So we have the preposition wan, we have great pirate age again, which is followed by the indefinite article r, the world again, which is smon, the verb is in the present tense, singular, which is ri, and the adverb, certainly, kanonan. Wan smon ri kanonan. So there's a lot going on in this translation, but I had a lot of fun making it. I hope you had at least a quarter of the fun listening to me talk about it. If you did, I guess subscribe if you want, although I would recommend you run as fast as possible. As before, thank you to my friend for the idea, and I will attempt to sign off with a Nixish goodbye. Ya-plcqlch.
Artma Ian o Tar. Rio wan Smon. Rib engwa uit am. An radier. Wip and Sprau. Matsk eng. Run ite agtsam. Rib Artma natsam. On kredkum zwurk trna de mog. It ag rin rauri. Wa pilp and ler jaur. Ar o at lian ot. Wip and ler it agtsam. Rib an erad an. Met ler on ok awedra klde mawat. Le bekler rib an ok atl igenwarza. Rim moon a jordon. Wan pilp and it agtsamre smon urik an nonal.